Good morning everyone, my name is Tom O'Sullivan and I am the Tax Accounting and Superannuation Portfolio Lead at Wolters Kluwer Publishing. Many of you will know our company by its former name as CCH, and we are leading providers of essential information, software and other services to help professionals get things right with the confidence that they need. I'm delighted to introduce our expert panel today, who will be discussing recent changes to the Tax Office public advice and guidance, especially emphasising the relatively new Law Companion Guidelines. These reforms will be undoubtedly beneficial for tax professionals when giving advice to clients. So with me today to discuss these developments from the Tax Office is Mr. Andrew Mills. Good morning, Andrew.
Good morning, Tom.
Andrew is currently the Second Commissioner of Taxation. He has overall responsibility for the Tax Office's law, practice and design, including law interpretation, dispute resolution, and the Tax Office's role in policy law design and change management. Andrew has over 30 years' experience in taxation, including periods in the Tax Office, in commerce and the tax profession. So, good morning. With me today as well is Mr. Will Day. Will Day from the Tax Office is currently the Deputy Chief Tax Counsel for the Public Advice and Guidance Centre. He has been tasked with leading a new approach to providing greater certainty and guidance for taxpayers and professionals in all forms of public advice and guidance. This will include improvements to the Tax Office's existing products and processes, including improved timeliness, as well as the rolling out of new products, and no doubt we'll hear some of this today in our conversation. Will has worked with the Tax Office for close to 20 years in a wide variety of legal and compliance-related roles, including senior roles. So good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, Tom. It's a great pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Andrew, I thought we'd get the ball rolling today by just asking you if you could explain a little to our viewers about Law Companion Guidelines.
Sure. Well, I guess to start with, we started trialling them late last year, 2015, with some new legislation that was coming through. And the idea is for the Tax Office to perhaps address some of the complaints that have occurred in the past about it taking a long time for us to come out and give our view on how the law is meant to operate. And that's not very useful because in the meantime, if we've taken a long time, people work it out for themselves and often will come up with a view. And if we come out later with something that's a bit different, well, that presents a problem for them. So the idea is to get on the front foot and very much start to develop guidance at the time the law is being introduced into Parliament. And it goes back a little before that. What we do is we sit down with the people who are doing the policy in Treasury, with stakeholders who are being consulted, with the parliamentary draftsmen, and work with them as they're developing the law to provide the guidance as to how the law will operate in practice. And part of that is also providing a feedback loop, because what we want is the law to be pretty principles-based, which allows flexibility in the way it can be applied in the future, and at the same time expose that a little bit more, give some practical guidance by working with those stakeholders to develop the way in which we're going to apply the law. We actually had quite a good experience as we were going through one of those that I'm aware of, where we were developing the guidance and people said, hang on, that's not the way we thought it was meant to be. And we went, okay, so we'll go back and we'll fix the law a little bit so that we can get clarity. So it was actually quite a good feedback loop. Yeah. So it's extraordinarily useful from that point of view. So at the time the law comes out, the idea is that we'll have some guidance for people to work with.
Okay, great. And how many Law Companion Guidelines currently exist, either in draft or final form?
So we've got 16. That's not 16 different pieces of legislation, but rather there's multiple ones on different parts of the law. It makes it practical and usable. We cover the managed investment trusts, the country-by-country reporting, the multinational anti-avoidance law, and some of the recent GST changes that had to do with territory. So that covered off some of the internet trading type stuff that is coming through Parliament at the moment. We are developing, or will be developing some others around small business and so on to some of those changes.
Okay. So some interesting developments coming there through in the small business space as well, with Law Companion Guidelines. And where can our viewers find the Law Companion Guidelines? For example, on the ATO database?
Yes, they're on the legal database.
Yes.
I guess there's multiple ways of finding things on the ATO website. You can browse through. You can go straight to the ATO legal database and find it under other guidelines, or just simply use a internet search engine and type in Law Companion Guides and ATO and it should pop up.
It'll come up, okay. Oh, great. Thanks very much, Andrew. And Will, maybe if I can bring you in at this point, it seems that Law Companion Guidelines are another piece of the jigsaw in fostering willing participation and changing the tax office kind of culture, part of its reinvention program. I understand that one of the things you've done in the public advice and guidance space is to establish a public advice and guidance centre. I thought this would be a good opportunity to ask you a little bit more about that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tom. So look, I've recently been appointed to a new role, a new senior role, and I'm dedicated to, I guess, leading improvements to all of our public advice and guidance. Law Companion Guidelines is one crucial element of that, but it's certainly not the end of the story. Fundamentally, we're looking at changing our culture and changing the DNA of our public advice so that it truly provides guidance, that it provides a real insight into the practical administration of the law by the ATO, and can really, as you say, enhance that taxpayer experience.
Mm-hmm. And as part of that as well, one of the projects I understand related to that is the layered approach with your website. Can you maybe just talk about that? Yeah.
So we recognise that one size doesn't fit all, that taxpayers and professionals have different needs. At one extreme is the detail in our public rulings, and at the other extreme, I guess, is website material through the ato.gov. We recognise that it's not always easy to get from different levels of detail, to get from the website through to our rulings. So what we want to do is develop varying layers with increasing amounts of detail so that taxpayers and professionals are able to choose the level of detail that they need for every circumstance.
Okay.
I might add in there, Tom, about the reason for setting up a particular public advice and guidance unit and having Will lead it. It's very much around a changed approach and a changed focus that we've really wanted to do. We've actually brought together people who are dedicated resources just focusing on that guidance. And very focused in terms of the way in which the guidance, as Will's been explaining, comes out. Because fundamentally we want guidance that guides. We want people to understand what it is, that they're able to therefore comply with their obligations under the law, and it's made easy, accessible and so on. And so the group that Will leads contains some very high level people who are focused on finding new ways of getting that advice out. But it's supplemented by units within our client experience group who can deal with the matters that are less, have less risk associated from our point of view and can quickly get out our view in whatever format. It may just be simply guidance on the website. It may take something a little bit more formal in the guise of the traditional tax determination or tax ruling. But even there we're looking to I guess reinvent, if I can use that term, the way in which we're going to present those too. In the past we've been criticised for a lot of the rulings and determinations that we've put out, really just restating what the law has said. Some of that is fair, not always, but some of it is quite fair. And what we're trying to do is to move away from that very formalistic approach to having something that really helps people understand what the law is trying to say and how it applies to them.
And it's interesting, isn't it, that that emphasis on giving people practical advice and guidance is a big theme in the tax office at the moment. And I understand I was at the Tax Institute's National Conference recently, and Commissioner Chris Jordan was talking there about a new product called Practical Compliance Guidelines.
Yes, exactly, and they're meant to supplement what we're doing in the space of the Law Companion Guides. So as the Law Companion Guide is in fact actually going to be a ruling and therefore binding on the tax office, we're conscious that it can't necessarily cover absolutely everything. And so what we're looking for is to give people some practical guidance about where it's safe to operate, if you like, where it's safe to swim between the flags, and putting out those flags so that people know that if they operate in that space, they're going to be low risk from our point of view. We're not going to be coming bashing down the door, being really concerned about what they're doing, because they've actually got some guidance as to where they can run their business, if you like.
Mm-hmm. Could you perhaps by any chance give us an example of one that you might be thinking about to give to Will, perhaps? Yeah.
Sure, there's the practical compliance guidelines really complement a lot of work that's already been undertaken by various safe harbour working groups, which is again a great example of the ATO working with the profession and with industry to determine where these safe harbours or where these compliance range might rest. So, for example, there's been a lot of activity around simplifying and streamlining processes for small fuel tax credits claimants, and so you'll shortly be seeing some publications in that sort of space.
Okay. And is another project part of ensuring that the tax officer's guidance guides will make sure that the examples in the public rulings actually reflect current commercial reality? Is that a project that the tax office is working on as well?
Certainly something that we're looking into. So one of the very obvious changes around our reinvention for public advice will be even greater consultation than we've undertaken in the past. We do want to consult very early in the piece, and that will involve consultation with the profession, taxpayers and industry. We're also looking to engage with academia and the private firms to see whether there's some lessons that we can learn about how we can better describe examples in our public advice to give it that greater commercial element.
Mm-hmm.
We're also using the academics to actually go back over a number of the old rulings that we've got and work out whether or not they make a lot of sense anymore, whether they should be updated, whether perhaps they just need to be archived as time's moved on and they just have no relevance. But I do want to pick up on something that Will mentioned about consultation. One of the things that we're very keen to do is to actually start consulting before anyone picks up a pen to write anything, to actually engage with people, so we actually really understand what the issues are and what it is we should be focused on in terms of the nature of the guidance that we're going to give.
Just on that subject of consultation, Tom, I should have mentioned earlier when I was talking about the layered approach, it is something that we want to get people's views on what's the best way of layering from website material through to ruling. So we'd really encourage your viewers to check out our beta website, that's beta.ato.gov.au, to have a look and provide their views on how best to do the layered approach.
And specifically, what does that do again, the layered approach?
So it's a way of navigating from basic material around what people's rights and obligations are under the tax law, and allows them to navigate to greater layers of detail, so whether that's around history of particular advice or greater content or examples, right through to the rulings, which might be the ultimate sort of technical input on what our view of the law is.
So a simple example might be some kind of work-related expense.
Mm-hmm.
The ordinary man in the street just wants to know, am I entitled to claim a deduction for it or not, and what are the rules, or maybe what some of the rules are around it. The practitioner may want to know, well, something a little bit more nuanced, what kinds of circumstances, particular kinds of occupations, where it might be safe to operate, and maybe even at a high level, perhaps the sources of law that relate to it, maybe the practicalities around what record keeping should go with it. Another layer still, a more technical person may in fact want to go behind to, as Will was saying, to the cases that support a particular kind of view, to the actual law itself as well. And then, of course, to our rulings, any other rulings that we may have on it. And that's the sort of the layers that people will be able to go through as they sort of go down, clicking on different levels and getting greater explanation about different parts of it.
So kind of giving people the information at the level that they really need it at.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So Will, perhaps if we can talk a little bit more again about the Law Companion Guidelines, what kind of content can people expect to see in them?
Fundamentally, the Law Companion Guideline is designed to support taxpayers and the profession's experience with new legislation. So we'll deliberately keep the content very flexible, so it provides the best support in a case-by-case basis. But typically, you might expect to see a material such as examples of how we see the law applying in practice. You might see a statement about describing taxpayer behaviour as being either high or low compliance risk and the consequences of certain types of behaviour. We'd also expect to see true practical insight into how we're going to administer the law, so advice on any transitional arrangements as well as a description of any documentary or reporting obligations.
Mm-hmm. And many viewers, I think, would be really interested to know what kind of protection a law companion guideline offers them. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Sure, Tom. So the default will be that law companion guidelines will be issued as will become a public ruling upon the law being enacted. That means it provides protection for taxpayers who rely on the law companion guideline in good faith against any additional tax penalties or interests. Of course, also if we've made any mistakes in the law companion guidelines where it's in the taxpayer's advantage, we'll generally only change the companion guideline prospectively. In those circumstances where all the content isn't relevant or appropriate as a public ruling, we'll make it very clear on the face of that particular law companion guideline which aspects are binding and which are not.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And do you expect the law companion guidelines always to be, the final version to be consistent with the draft version?
Look, I think that the principle that we want to live by is that the law companion guidelines should provide effective early certainty for taxpayers. So we would only change a law companion guideline where there is a good and substantial reason to do so. Now that might typically be if Parliament amends the legislation before it's passed, or if during the consultation phase we're told we haven't addressed the right issues.
Mm-hmm.
The important thing to also note is that the law companion guides won't be the final word on a particular area of the law. Obviously, as experience shows us, there are different kinds of issues that emerge, different practicalities that taxpayers are bringing to us where they need guidance and so on. We'll put out additional kinds of guidance, be it in the form of ruling or website material, whatever is required, to meet the needs as that unfolds.
So it's not the last word?
No.
No, of course, yeah. When will the law companion guideline, the final version usually, will take effect? When will that take effect? Yeah.
Well, once the law is passed, at that point the companion guideline can become a ruling. It will generally take effect from the time at which the legislation takes effect. However, that may vary from case to case and will be very clear on the companion guideline itself when it takes effect.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew, you mentioned before that some of the law companion guideline topics at the moment include the multinational anti-avoidance law and also the proposed managed investment trust regime.
Yes.
I'm sure some viewers would be really interested to know about the process the tax office goes through in identifying those areas of the law that warrant a law companion guideline. Is there anything you can say about that?
Well, I guess fundamentally it's what our stakeholders tell us, and that's really part of the need for the early consultation. As many viewers would be aware, we often consult with particular industry segments, professional bodies and so on, who have an interest in, or in many cases are the experts in the particular law that is going through. And so by getting their insights, we're able to work with them to determine what areas will really require some kind of additional guidance, where the sticking points in the way the law has been drafted may be assisted by having that kind of guidance out there. So it's very much driven by what the stakeholders are telling us.
Mm-hmm. And Will, is there anything you can add to that?
Well, I guess our starting point, Tom, would be that we've received very strong feedback from the community that they want early certainty. They want to understand what new law means for them. So our starting point certainly is that we'll provide law companion guidelines wherever it's wherever possible, where our stakeholders tell us that it can help them.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. It seems that law companion guidelines are developed at the same time as the development as the explanatory memorandums, as the law is being written and prepared, developed. Are there any plans to develop law companion guidelines on historical measures, Will?
Well, we think that the niche of the Law Companion Guideline really is to provide that early effective certainty. So it's to complement the legislative design process. Mm-hmm. So we're not looking at our other existing advice to reissue as a Law Companion Guideline. But as we were saying before, part of our reinvention around public advice is ensuring greater consultation, is providing guidance that guides. That's sort of the DNA of our public advice, and you'll see elements of that DNA through all the products of our public advice and guidance over time.
Mm-hmm. And Andrew, is there anything you wanted to add to that? Or?
Well, I guess the only thing I'd add is the way in which the legislation is designed is fundamentally going to be assisted by having this kind of advice. So, in the past, law has often been cluttered by a lot of detail, and detail that can sometimes get out of date very quickly by virtue of going to that level. By allowing the legislation to lift up a bit, it can live better, if you like. It's able to adapt to the circumstances that change over time. As new technologies, for example, might present challenges to an old law that is drafted in that very traditional style with a lot of detail. Whereas if you take some of that detail out, the law can adapt and the guidelines can assist. And while we may think of something today, something new comes along tomorrow that no one's ever thought about. Well, you want the law to be able to adapt and for us to be able to quickly give people a sense of how the law is going to apply to those new circumstances.
Okay, thank you very much. And maybe as we kind of approach wrapping up, what sort of feedback have you received about Law Companion Guidelines, Andrew? What's the response been like by the community?
Positive, absolutely positive. Those who've been involved in the process have been very complimentary about them. They've certainly received a lot of support, but not only that, I know that the chairman of the Board of Tax, in a recent speech, spoke of them and how supportive he was. So I think the whole of the tax profession is getting behind them. They're certainly seeing them as a great adjunct to the way in which law can be developed.
And I suppose to finish, like what would be the key messages, Andrew and Will? Andrew, if I could start with you, that you'd like to leave our viewers with today about what's happening in the public advice and guidance space?
Well, we're certainly trying to be much more practical, user-friendly, certainly accessible. We're certainly trying to ensure that the guidance we give is not just simply a reflection of the way the law is, but also gives people a sense of to how they can in fact apply it in practical situations. And to the extent to which people can identify there are areas of our guidance that can be improved, we're certainly really welcoming and encouraging people to give us that kind of input.
Fantastic, thank you. And Will?
So for me, Tom, I guess that the Law Companion Guideline is a great early example of how we're doing things differently. More contemporary, more practical, earlier advice. But it is just an example of one of the things that we're doing. And as we've described, fundamentally we're changing the DNA of our public advice so that it can provide greater guidance to those users. And as Andrew just said, we're keen to hear from and keen to work with industry to really partner on our new approaches to public advice.
Okay, well, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you both for taking the time to explain what's happening in the ATO's public advice and guidance space. I know it's going to be of tremendous interest to our viewers, and I think it really also exemplifies some of the cultural change and the ongoing work that's happening at the Tax Office as part of its reinvention program to develop products that give people the answers that they need and do it in a quick kind of manner. So I'd really like to thank you for informing our viewers today and your time this morning. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.